Richard Wells had built an empire from nothing. He was a man who controlled every aspect of his life, until the night an 8-year-old girl walked up to his table in an upscale restaurant and said 4 words that shattered his world. "You are my dad." In that moment, everything he thought he knew about his life changed forever. Richard Wells sat at his usual table in an upscale New York restaurant, enjoying a quiet evening alone. The soft hum of classical music played in the background, and the warm glow of chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors. He had spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings, and now, finally, he had a moment to himself. A perfectly cooked steak, a glass of expensive red wine, and the satisfaction of knowing he had closed yet another multi-million-dollar deal. Just as he lifted his fork, a shadow appeared at the edge of his table. He expected to see the waiter, but when he looked up, his hand froze midair. Standing before him was a small girl, no older than 8, with delicate features, bright blue eyes, and golden blonde hair tied back with a pale pink ribbon. She was dressed in a simple but neat dress, her small hands clasped together in front of her. She didn't look lost. She wasn't crying or searching for a parent. She was looking directly at him, unblinking, as if she had been searching for him and had finally found what she was looking for. "Mr. Wells?" Her voice was soft, but there was confidence behind it. The way she said his name sent an uneasy feeling through his chest. Richard placed his fork down and straightened slightly. He had no idea who this child was. He wasn't someone who spent time around kids. His life was carefully curated, his business empire, his luxurious lifestyle, his social circle. There was no room for unexpected encounters like this. "Yes." The girl took a deep breath, her expression unwavering. "My name is Emily. And, you're my dad." The world around Richard seemed to freeze. The gentle murmur of conversations at nearby tables faded, the clinking of silverware against plates became distant. It was as if time itself had paused. His first instinct was disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. A prank? A misunderstanding? But something about the way she stood, the steadiness in her voice, made his heart pound a little harder. "Excuse me. You're my dad." Richard leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a heavy fog. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. He had no children. He had never been married. His past relationships had been fleeting, nothing that could have led to this. And yet, as he looked at the girl again, really looked at her, something in her face was unsettlingly familiar. The curve of her nose, the shape of her chin, those piercing blue eyes. The waiter, who had been approaching with a bottle of wine, hesitated nearby, sensing the tension. Richard waved him away without a word. His appetite had vanished. He exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to remain even. "Who told you that?" The girl hesitated for the first time. She lowered her gaze slightly, then reached into the small purse she had slung over her shoulder. From it, she pulled out a folded piece of paper and carefully placed it on the table in front of him. Richard stared at it for a long moment before reaching forward. His hands, steady in the boardroom, steady in billion-dollar negotiations, felt strangely unsteady now. He unfolded the paper and saw his own name printed there. His full name. Alongside it, the words "Father, Richard Wells." His throat went dry. His signature was at the bottom of the document. A paternity record. His mind flashed back years, trying to grasp at any thread that could explain this. The girl's voice was quieter now. "My mom, she passed away 2 weeks ago. I found these papers in her things. She never told me about you before." Richard's stomach twisted. He suddenly felt the weight of her presence in a way he hadn't before. She wasn't just a child claiming something impossible. She was alone. He looked back up at her, but for the first time in years, he had no idea what to say. Richard sat frozen, gripping the paper in his hands. The words blurred slightly as his mind struggled to process them. His name. Paternity record. Father. None of it made sense, and yet, the evidence was right there in front of him. Emily stood quietly, her hands still clasped together, her wide blue eyes watching him closely. She had the patience of someone much older than her age, as if she already knew that whatever came next wouldn't be easy. Richard cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak. "Where have you been staying?" Emily hesitated, shifting slightly. "With a neighbor. But she said she can't keep me for long." A sharp pang hit Richard's chest. The idea of this small child, his daughter, having nowhere to go made something unfamiliar twist inside him. Guilt? Responsibility? He wasn't sure. He forced his voice to remain steady. "And your mother?" Emily looked down at the table. "She got sick. It happened fast. One day she was fine, and then, she wasn't." Her voice wavered slightly, but she didn't cry. Richard felt the weight of those words settle over him. The woman, Sarah, he hadn't seen her in almost a decade. They had met during one of his business trips to Chicago, spent a brief, passionate few months together, but he had moved on, believing she had too. She had never reached out, never told him about Emily. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "Did she ever mention me?" Emily shook her head. "No. I only found out when I went through her things after she." She trailed off, her small shoulders tensing. The realization hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Sarah had never told him because she hadn't wanted him to know. He had lived his life oblivious while she had raised their daughter alone. A heavy silence settled between them. The restaurant, once a backdrop to his luxurious, controlled life, now felt suffocating. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversations, the scent of expensive wine, it all seemed so distant from the moment unraveling before him. Emily finally spoke again, her voice careful. "I don't want anything from you. I didn't know where else to go." Her words stung. Did she think he would turn her away? That he would simply ignore the fact that she was his child? But could he blame her for thinking that? Richard had spent years prioritizing work, wealth, and efficiency over personal connections. He had never imagined himself as a father, had never wanted that kind of responsibility. His life was about order, and this was chaos. Yet, as he looked at Emily, standing there in her too small dress, clutching that worn piece of paper like it was the only thing tethering her to him, he felt something shift inside him. She had no one else. The thought unsettled him more than he was willing to admit. Richard straightened in his chair, folding the document and setting it down carefully. "You'll stay with me tonight," he said, his voice firm, though inside, he wasn't sure what he was doing. "We'll figure things out in the morning." Emily blinked up at him, clearly surprised, but she nodded. For the first time in his life, Richard Wells had no idea what the next step was. But for some reason, for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about himself. Richard led Emily out of the restaurant, his mind still reeling. The valet brought his sleek black Mercedes to the entrance, and as he opened the passenger door for her, she hesitated. "You can sit in the front," he said, unsure why he felt the need to reassure her. Emily climbed in, her small frame almost swallowed by the luxurious leather seat. She buckled her seatbelt silently while Richard slid into the driver's seat. He started the engine, but for a moment, he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. What was he supposed to say? The reality of the situation was hitting him harder now that they were away from the crowded restaurant. He had a daughter. A child who had been living without him for 8 years. And now she was in his car, headed to his home. He cleared his throat. "Do you have anything with you? Clothes, a bag?" Emily shook her head. "I left my backpack at my neighbor's house. It only has a few things." Richard's grip on the wheel tightened. The thought of her having so little sent another unfamiliar pang through him. He was a man who owned multiple properties, designer suits, and luxury cars, yet his own daughter had almost nothing. He pulled out of the parking lot, the city lights flashing past as they drove in silence. After a few minutes, Emily spoke. "Where do you live?" "In Midtown," he replied. "Top floor of a high-rise." She nodded but didn't say anything else. Richard stole a glance at her. She was staring out the window, her small hands resting in her lap. She looked composed, but he could see the exhaustion in her posture, the way her eyelids drooped slightly. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "This morning." Richard clenched his jaw. "You should have told me you were hungry at the restaurant." She shrugged. "I didn't want to ask." That answer unsettled him more than it should have. She was used to going without, to not asking for things. The thought made him feel strangely ashamed. Minutes later, they pulled into the underground parking garage of his building. Richard stepped out and walked around to open Emily's door. She hesitated before taking his hand to climb out. Her fingers were cold. Inside the elevator, she looked up at him. "Are you always this quiet?" That caught him off guard. "I don't usually have unexpected guests." Emily nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. "You don't like surprises?" "No." "Then I guess I'm a big problem for you," she said matter-of-factly. Richard exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "You're not a problem, Emily. This is just new." The elevator doors slid open, revealing the entrance to his penthouse. The moment they stepped inside, Emily's eyes widened. The space was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek furniture, a grand piano in the corner. The entire place was spotless, every surface polished, every piece of furniture placed with precision. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes." Emily walked further in, turning in a slow circle. "It's really clean." Richard almost laughed. "I have people who take care of it." Her gaze lingered on the towering bookshelves, the expensive artwork on the walls. Then she turned back to him. "Where do I sleep?" That was a question he hadn't considered. He had 3 guest rooms, but none of them were designed for a child. He motioned toward the hallway. "There's a room down there. You can use it for now." Emily followed him down the hall, stopping at the doorway as he switched on the light. The room was large, with a queen-sized bed, a desk, and a sitting area. It was elegant, decorated in neutral tones, but it looked more like a hotel suite than a child's bedroom. Emily stood at the threshold, gripping the strap of her purse. "It doesn't feel like a kid's room." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't expecting a kid to be here." She nodded as if that made sense. Then, after a pause, she asked, "Is it okay if I sleep with the light on?" He hadn't expected that. "Of course." He flipped the switch on a bedside lamp. Emily walked into the room and sat on the bed, bouncing slightly as if testing its softness. She looked so small sitting there. Richard lingered in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. He was used to making decisions with confidence, but tonight, he felt completely out of his depth. "Do you need anything else?" he asked. Emily thought for a moment. "I think I'm okay." He hesitated. "All right. Get some sleep." She lay back on the bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. "Good night, Mr. Wells." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. "Good night, Emily." He turned off the overhead light and stepped out, leaving the door slightly open. As he walked back to his own room, he exhaled heavily. He had just put his daughter to bed. A daughter he had never known existed. And for the first time in years, Richard Wells had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Richard barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers to. How had he gone 8 years without knowing he had a daughter? Why had Sarah never told him? And now that Emily was here, what was he supposed to do? At some point, exhaustion took over, and he drifted into a restless sleep. But in the early hours of the morning, a faint noise pulled him awake. He lay still for a moment, listening. A quiet shuffle. A door creaking open. He sat up and ran a hand over his face. The realization hit him, Emily. Throwing on a t-shirt, he stepped out of his bedroom and made his way down the hall. The light in the guest room was still on, and the door was slightly ajar. Peeking inside, he found Emily sitting on the edge of the bed, her small frame hunched over. She had changed into an oversized t-shirt, one of his, he realized, but she was still wearing her socks. Her blonde hair was slightly messy from sleep, and she was clutching something in her hands. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Emily jumped slightly, then turned to face him. "Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." Richard shook his head. "It's fine. What's wrong?" She hesitated before unfolding her fingers, revealing a small, creased photograph. He stepped closer, and she handed it to him. It was an old picture of Sarah, smiling, her arm wrapped around a much younger Emily. Richard felt his chest tighten. "I didn't want to forget her," Emily murmured. Richard sat on the bed beside her, still staring at the photo. He hadn't seen Sarah in years, but seeing her face now brought a rush of emotions he wasn't prepared for. Regret. Guilt. A strange kind of grief. "You won't forget her," he said quietly. Emily looked up at him. "Did you love her?" The question caught him off guard. He exhaled slowly. "I cared about her. But we weren't together for long. I didn't know she was pregnant." Emily nodded, as if she had already guessed the answer. "She never talked about you?" "Not even once." Richard swallowed hard. He had spent the past 24 hours struggling with the fact that Sarah had kept Emily a secret from him. But hearing it from Emily herself made it feel even more real. "Do you think she was mad at you?" she asked. He considered that for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe she thought I wouldn't have wanted to be a father." "Would you have?" Richard hesitated. If Sarah had told him back then, would he have stepped up? Or would he have been too consumed by his career, too afraid of responsibility? "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that I won't walk away now." Emily studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Okay." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Are you hungry?" he asked suddenly. Emily's lips twitched slightly. "A little." Richard stood up. "Come on. Let's see what we can find." They made their way to the kitchen. The sleek, modern space was usually just for show. He rarely cooked, preferring to have his meals prepared for him. But tonight, it felt too impersonal. Emily climbed onto a bar stool, watching him as he opened the fridge. "Do you ever make your own food?" Richard smirked. "Rarely." She kicked her feet lightly against the stool. "Mom always made pancakes when I couldn't sleep." Richard grabbed a carton of eggs. "Pancakes it is, then." Emily looked surprised. "You know how?" "I can follow instructions," he said, reaching for the flour. As he mixed the batter, Emily sat quietly, her chin resting in her hands. When he started flipping the pancakes, she finally spoke again. "I don't know how long I'm supposed to stay here." Richard froze for a second before carefully placing a pancake onto a plate. "You don't have anywhere else to go, do you?" She shook her head. "No." He set the plate in front of her and met her gaze. "Then you'll stay here. As long as you need to." Emily picked up her fork, considering his words. "Okay." For the first time, Richard felt like he had made the right decision. Maybe he had no idea how to be a father. Maybe he was still figuring out what this all meant. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let her go. The next morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't sure if it was because his mind was still processing everything that had happened or because, for the first time in years, someone else was living under his roof. Someone who depended on him. He got up and walked to the kitchen, expecting to find it empty, but to his surprise, Emily was already there. She was sitting at the counter, her blonde hair slightly messy, swinging her feet as she nibbled on a piece of toast. "You're up early," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Emily shrugged. "I woke up and didn't know what to do." Her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't used to having a home where she felt comfortable. She didn't know what her routine was supposed to be here. "You don't have to just sit here," he said. "You can watch TV, read a book, explore the apartment." Emily looked around. "Your place is really quiet." Richard leaned against the counter, sipping his coffee. "I guess I never noticed before." She studied him for a moment. "What do you usually do all day?" He smirked slightly. "Work." "That's it?" "That's it." Emily frowned. "That sounds boring." Richard chuckled. "Most people don't think running a company is boring." Emily took another bite of her toast. "Mom worked all the time too. But she always made sure we had time together." Something about the way she said it made Richard pause. "What did you and your mom do together?" Emily's face softened. "Sometimes we would go to the park. Or bake cookies. She liked to draw, so she taught me a little. She was always busy, but she tried to make time for me." Richard felt a pang of guilt. Sarah had worked hard to give Emily a good life, and he hadn't even known. She had been raising their daughter alone while he had been focused on business deals and profits. He cleared his throat. "Well, we'll figure something out. Maybe we can do something fun later." Emily's eyes lit up slightly. "Like what?" Richard hesitated. He wasn't exactly the fun type. Business meetings, networking events, luxury galas, those were his world. "I'll think of something," he said. Emily looked skeptical but didn't argue. Richard checked the time. He had a meeting in an hour, one he couldn't miss. But as he looked at Emily, sitting there in his kitchen, he realized he couldn't just leave her alone all day. "I need to go to work for a few hours," he said. "But I'll have someone stay with you." Emily frowned. "I don't need a babysitter. You're 8. I can take care of myself." Richard sighed. "I don't doubt that. But you're not going to sit here by yourself. I'll have someone bring you anything you need." Emily crossed her arms. "I'm not used to people doing things for me." Richard smirked. "You better get used to it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard went to open it and found his assistant, Natalie, standing there. She was in her early 30s, dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, her dark hair neatly pulled back. She had been his right hand for years, handling everything from scheduling to crisis management. She stepped inside, glancing at Emily with curiosity before turning back to Richard. "Good morning, sir. You said it was urgent?" Richard motioned toward Emily. "I need you to stay here with her for a few hours." Natalie blinked. "With her?" Emily waved awkwardly. "Hi." Natalie gave her a polite smile before looking back at Richard. "Sir, I have 3 meetings scheduled for you today." "Reschedule them," he said. Natalie looked surprised. "You never reschedule." "I am today." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. And what exactly do you want me to do?" Richard glanced at Emily. "Just keep her company. Make sure she eats. If she needs anything, take care of it." Natalie nodded, but Richard could see the curiosity in her expression. He wasn't in the mood to explain everything right now. He turned back to Emily. "I'll be back in a few hours. Be good." Emily smirked. "I'll try." As he left the apartment, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that his world was changing faster than he could keep up with. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. Richard spent the next few hours at his office, but his mind wasn't on work. No matter how many reports he skimmed through or emails he responded to, he kept thinking about Emily. He had spent his entire life meticulously building his career, making calculated decisions, and ensuring that every move he made was precise. And yet, here he was, thrown into a situation he never saw coming. A daughter. His daughter. By lunchtime, he had barely made a dent in his work. Finally, he sighed, leaned back in his chair, and reached for his phone. He dialed Natalie. "How's it going?" There was a brief silence before she responded. "She's different from the people you usually surround yourself with." Richard smirked. "I assume that means she's not impressed by expensive suits and stock market trends." "Not in the slightest," Natalie replied dryly. "But she's polite. And surprisingly independent for an 8-year-old. Richard leaned forward. "What's she doing now?" "She's drawing. Said her mom taught her." That made Richard pause. He hadn't known Sarah liked to draw. Another piece of her life, of Emily's life, that he had never been a part of. He exhaled. "All right. I'll be home soon." After hanging up, he grabbed his suit jacket and left the office earlier than planned. When he walked into his penthouse, he found Emily sitting at the kitchen counter, completely focused on her drawing. Natalie sat nearby, reading something on her tablet, occasionally glancing at the girl as if still trying to make sense of the situation. Richard walked over and peered at Emily's paper. "What are you working on?" She looked up at him, then hesitated before flipping the sketchpad around. It was a drawing of the two of them. Richard was taken aback. In the picture, he stood beside her, his suit drawn with surprisingly sharp detail, while Emily held his hand. There were no extravagant backgrounds, no unnecessary embellishments. Just them. Emily studied his face carefully. "Do you like it?" Richard nodded, swallowing down the unfamiliar lump in his throat. "Yeah. It's good." She beamed, clearly pleased. Natalie stood, smoothing out her skirt. "I'll head out now. Call me if you need anything." Richard gave her a grateful nod. "Thanks, Natalie." After she left, he turned back to Emily, who was still looking at him curiously. "You left work early," she pointed out. He shrugged, walking toward the fridge. "Figured I should check on things here." Emily smirked. "Did you miss me?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "You've been here for less than a day. That's not a no." He sighed, pulling out a bottle of water. "Don't get used to it." Emily giggled, then went back to her drawing. For the next few moments, Richard just watched her. She was so at ease, as if she had always belonged here. And yet, he knew this wasn't normal for her. She had spent years without him. Years believing she didn't have a father. He leaned against the counter. "Emily." She looked up. "You said earlier you didn't know how long you'd be staying here." She nodded slowly. Richard exhaled. "You're not going anywhere." Her eyes widened slightly. "Really?" He nodded. "I don't know what I'm doing, and I won't pretend to. But you're my daughter. That's not changing. So, you stay here. This is your home now." Emily was silent for a moment, as if letting the words sink in. Then, she smiled. It wasn't just any smile, it was relief, hope, and something deeper. "Okay," she whispered. Richard didn't realize how much he needed to hear that until the moment she said it. And for the first time, he understood, this wasn't just about her life changing. His had changed, too. The days that followed were unlike anything Richard had ever experienced. His life, once carefully structured and predictable, had shifted into something entirely new. Mornings were no longer just about checking emails and preparing for meetings, they now included making sure Emily ate breakfast, figuring out how to style a child's hair, which, he quickly realized, was much harder than he expected, and adjusting his schedule to accommodate a daughter who had suddenly become the center of his world. At first, it was awkward. Richard wasn't used to having someone else in his space. He wasn't used to hearing footsteps running down the hall, the sound of cartoons playing in the background, or finding a trail of tiny socks and coloring pencils scattered across his once pristine apartment. But despite the adjustments, he found himself enjoying it. One evening, after an exhausting day at work, Richard returned home to find Emily sitting on the living room floor, a pile of books spread out around her. She was flipping through a hardcover novel, her blonde hair falling into her face as she read. He set down his briefcase. "What are you reading?" Emily looked up, pushing her hair back. "Just one of the books from your shelf." "I was bored." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You read for fun?" She grinned. "Mom always said books take you to new places. Even if you're stuck in the same one." Something about her words made him pause. Emily had been through so much in her short life, losing her mother, living in uncertainty, and now, suddenly being thrown into a completely different world with a father she barely knew. And yet, she carried herself with a quiet strength that he hadn't expected. Richard sat down on the couch, loosening his tie. "What kind of books do you like?" Emily thought for a moment. "Mysteries. And stories about people who figure things out." Richard smirked. "You'd make a good detective." She laughed. "Maybe. But I think I'd rather be an artist." He glanced at the sketchpad beside her, filled with drawings. Some were simple doodles, others more detailed, especially the ones of people. There was one of him, sitting at his desk, looking serious. Richard chuckled. "You captured my business face perfectly." Emily grinned. "You always look like that." He shook his head, amused. "I do not." "You do." Richard sighed dramatically. "I guess I'll have to work on that." Emily giggled before flipping to a new page in her sketchbook. "Can I draw you again?" He leaned back. "Go ahead." For the next few minutes, she sketched while he scrolled through his emails, but he kept sneaking glances at her. She was focused, her small fingers moving quickly over the paper, her tongue slightly poking out in concentration. Eventually, she turned the sketchbook around to show him. This time, the drawing was different. It wasn't just him sitting at his desk. It was him and her, sitting side by side. He looked more relaxed in this one, less like a CEO and more like a dad. Richard felt something tighten in his chest. Emily looked up at him, waiting for his reaction. "Do you like it?" He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yeah. I do." She smiled, clearly pleased. Then, after a moment, she said softly, "I'm glad I found you." Richard exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Me too, kid." And the truth was, he really meant it. Richard never thought his life would change so drastically in just a matter of days. A week ago, he had been living in perfect control, his days planned down to the minute, his world revolving around business deals, stock markets, and high-profile meetings. Now, everything was different. And for the first time, he didn't mind. One morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he found Emily standing on a chair, trying to reach the cabinet above the counter. She was on her tiptoes, struggling to grab a cereal box that was just out of reach. "Need some help?" Richard asked, leaning against the doorway. Emily huffed, crossing her arms. "No. I'm independent." Richard smirked, walking over and easily pulling the box down. Aha. And what was your plan if you fell off that chair? She grinned. You would have caught me. Richard rolled his eyes, handing her the cereal. You've got too much confidence in me. Emily poured herself a bowl and looked up at him. You're my dad. You're supposed to catch me. Something about the way she said it made Richard pause. It wasn't just a passing comment, it was trust. Real, solid trust. He grabbed his coffee and sat across from her at the counter. What do you want to do today? Emily tilted her head. Don't you have work? He shrugged. I rescheduled my meetings. Her eyes widened. You never reschedule. Richard smirked. Guess I'm learning new things. Emily smiled, then tapped her spoon against the edge of her bowl. Can we go to the park? Richard raised an eyebrow. The park? You know, fresh air, trees, normal human things, she teased. He sighed dramatically. Fine. But if I get bored, it's your fault. Later that afternoon, they drove to Central Park. The weather was crisp, the sun shining through the scattered autumn leaves. Emily ran ahead, her blonde hair bouncing as she explored, while Richard followed at a slower pace, watching her with an unfamiliar feeling in his chest. He wasn't used to this. He had spent years thinking success was measured by numbers in a bank account, by the power he held in the corporate world. But standing here, watching Emily laugh as she chased a squirrel, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Emily ran back to him, slightly out of breath. Okay, I have a serious question. Richard crossed his arms. I'm listening. She looked up at him with wide blue eyes. Do you think I could have a dog? Richard blinked. A dog? Emily nodded eagerly. Yeah. A little one. Not super big. Like a puppy. Richard sighed. That's a big responsibility. I am responsible, she argued. I lived on my own for 2 weeks. That statement hit him harder than he expected. He hated the thought of her having to be responsible for herself at such a young age. He exhaled. We'll think about it. Emily gasped. That's not a no. He smirked. It's not a yes, either. She grinned, clearly satisfied with the possibility. They walked through the park, stopping for ice cream from a vendor. Richard wasn't sure how long they stayed, he wasn't keeping track of time like he usually did. He wasn't rushing to his next appointment. He wasn't constantly checking his phone. He was just there. As the sun started to set, Emily looked up at him. Hey, Richard. He raised an eyebrow. Richard? She smirked. I mean. Dad. Something in his chest tightened. He didn't know why hearing that word from her made him feel like he had accomplished something bigger than any business deal he had ever closed. Yeah, he said. Emily hesitated for a moment, then grinned. This was a good day. Richard looked down at her, and for the first time, he didn't just see a child who had unexpectedly come into his life. He saw his daughter. And he realized something, he wouldn't trade this for anything. Not even $1 million deal. This story is a testament to the unexpected twists life can throw at us and how the most profound changes often come from the least expected places. Richard Wells, a man who spent his life chasing success and control, found something far more valuable, a purpose beyond wealth and power. What makes this journey so compelling is its emotional depth. At first, Richard sees Emily as a disruption, a problem to be solved. But as the story unfolds, he begins to understand that she isn't an obstacle, she's a gift. She forces him to break out of his carefully curated world, to step beyond his comfort zone, and, ultimately, to become someone better. The beauty of this ending lies in its simplicity. Richard doesn't just accept Emily as his daughter, he chooses her. Not because he has to, but because he wants to. And in doing so, he experiences something no amount of money could ever buy: unconditional love, true connection, and the realization that family is the greatest investment of all. This is more than a story about a millionaire finding out he has a child. It's a story about transformation, about learning that real success isn't measured in profits and power but in the relationships we nurture. And in the end, Richard doesn't just give Emily a home, she gives him one, too.